This is Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Andrew DiCecco is here. We'll get his take on everything that is happening. He was at the press conference yesterday. Looks like Vic Fangio, according to sources, is going to be the new Eagle defensive coordinator. We have some new names on the offensive coordinator side, and a lot of questions coming in for Andrew for today's Football at 4 as the offseason is here. And Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com is here on this edition of Football at 4. Andrew, what's up, my brother?
What's up, MG? There are no shortage of talking points today.
No, there's not. And you were at the press conference yesterday, and I guess right smack in the middle of it, news came down that Vic Fangio was leaving Miami. That had to be a very interesting point in the presser yesterday. And then today, pretty much announced that he will be the coordinator. So I want to get your take on that. If Vic Fangio is running the defense and they make no additions, is this defense significantly better?
Well, it's interesting because you couldn't help but draw parallels when they were 30 minutes behind schedule. Then you see that news drop. I don't know if they had something in the works there, but it surely seemed like that was going to be inevitable. Vic Fangio coming here. They had a ton of disciples. They tried it with Gannon. They tried it with Desai, but now they get the real deal. And it's really interesting because you're getting Vic Fangio at 65 years old. He's someone who is an authoritative, commanding presence, as I understand. He's been termed a strict disciplinarian and someone who explains the why behind film study, really details it, and expects players to deep dive, and he wants them to understand it. And I really do think he's going to get the best out of the players that are here, but he's also a no-nonsense type of coach, as I understand it. So anyone that's not fully bought in, he'll be able to sniff that out right away. Now, the question becomes, what are they going to do personnel-wise? Because obviously you're running that scheme more or less last season, and you didn't have the personnel equipped to run that efficiently. So with through the draft, through free agency, you have to wonder what they're going to do in order to – they have to overhaul that defense really to be able to execute what Vic Fangio likes to do, the too-high safety scheme, limit explosive force, the short throws. So they're going to have their work cut out for him this offseason.
Yeah, I was going to say, Vic Fangio, he runs a very similar style of what we've seen here, but he's the originator of it. So you go get the original guy, you don't get the knockoffs. So with the talent they have, we had a question that came in earlier specifically for you, Andrew. Some of these younger guys, do any of these guys appeal to Vic Fangio? Or do you think, I look at this earlier in the show, I talked about, and I don't know what this means for Ringo and Ricks and Job and, Goodrich and that crew. But you hire Vic Fangio. I almost feel like Roseman, that's the first move of saying we're going to be aggressive and we're going to go upgrade the talent. But do any of those guys to you play well in this style? Is this the best style for that group of corner young guys?
Well, I was obviously working the phones this morning, making some calls and reaching out to some folks familiar with the situation. And I specifically mentioned the defensive back situation, knowing that the Eagles have a young core of DBs that struggled from communication and tackling and just fundamentals. There was a lot of lapses last season. And I was curious as to how Vic Fangio would go about refining that. And the source told me, make no mistake, he's going to, if you can't communicate, you can't play. That they're going to harp on that, and that's going to be something where they make it a point of emphasis and they drill that into the players. But I think Keely Ringo, to your point, really fits into that scheme well. He did some good things last year, and I think we'll be able to build on that. But you don't just want to rest on your laurels and assume that you get Keely Ringo, you have an Isaiah Rodgers, who, by the way, will apply for reinstatement after the Super Bowl, but that's an unknown entity. You don't want to go into the season assuming that you have players there like the Eagles did with the Kobe Dean. But I think Ricks can serve a purpose as a depth player, but they are going to have to go through the draft to add a safety, add a high-end corner, and maybe you might see some Vic Fangio, former Miami Dolphins that enjoyed playing with him, there's a couple safeties out there that could fit as a free agent, namely Brandon Jones. So I'm interested to see how they piece that together.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Fangio, when he looks at the film of these guys, who he's intrigued by, who he likes, who he kind of thinks that, because I guess one of the first things would be you're sitting in a room, Howie Roseman, Vic Fangio, you're going over this roster. All right, who can still play? Who do we need to replace? I'm wondering if Fangio, you kind of say he's disciplinarian, and is he going to have a voice in that room in terms of what type of players I need?
Absolutely. Just, if the press conference was any indication, whoever presides over the defense, which in this case is going to be Vic Fangio, they're going to have full autonomy of personnel and decision-making, and they're going to be able to run that side of the football, much like the offensive coordinator will. Nick is going to be the CEO type of head coach that oversees everything. So I really do think that, you're allowing your veteran coach and Vic Fangio to supply the defense with what he needs, at least give some input via draft prospects, certain builds of players that you need to be able to run, looking at the defensive line, maybe linebacker, and you kind of just let him go to work. Now, they do have a lot of work to do, but they have some wiggle room there through the draft, some high-end draft selections and free agency where I think you're going to see them completely revamp the defense. They have to.
Yes, and some of those revampings probably need to be at corner, where the Bradbury deal, very difficult to get out of. The Slay deal, not great either. Your mind, does Vic Fangio have to have those two corners to work with next year? Are they both back here?
Well, Bradbury's pretty difficult with the $17.2 million dead cap hit, 4.8 cap hit. I don't know what you're able to do with him. I know a lot of folks out there would like the Eagles to just cut their losses and move on. But that's an exorbitant chunk of change there. So if I'm the Eagles, I'm trying to find a way to make it work. Maybe you're moving him to a safety role, to a specialty position where he's covering up tight ends, and that's your guy to do that. But certainly you want to roll him out there and be your outside corner, expecting a rebound as he continues to age. I think that would be malpractice. Now, I do think that there is a role for him, just certainly not as a starter. Darius Slay is where it gets interesting, right? 33 years old. I thought he did some good things last year, but you're reaching that age with Slay where corners tend to fall off, and you don't want to wait for the other shoe to drop. You want to have a succession plan in place for when that happens, and it has yet to be seen how he's going to fit into that scheme. Veteran players, not all veteran players are going to buy into a coach who is going to come in here with that no-nonsense, brash attitude, because they've accomplished a lot in this league. So you don't know how every veteran is going to be receptive to that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I said this before. Roseman, obviously, he gives these deals. I don't know how he gets out of the Bradbury deal. They ate the Wentz money and played a whole season with his dead cap hit. But does he hand that deal out saying, I know a way to get out of the deal? I mean, we'll see. I mean, if anybody can get out of a deal, it's probably Roseman. But those two deals might be almost impossible to get out of because of the dead caps and the money, as you just kind of chronicled there. Byard's another interesting one. Like, does Fangio say, you know what? I get a full training camp with Kevin Byard. I think he's a guy that would fit. What do you think about that?
Well, on paper, that trade looked like it was going to be a home run, but Kevin Byard didn't really add a whole lot to the back end there. He was actually a primary culprit in many of the communication breakdowns. I thought his tackling was pretty shoddy. And when you needed a veteran leader, when Slay went out, Bradbury's more of a quiet guy, you would expect someone like a Kevin Byard to be able to get those guys lined up, to really be assertive in his communication. And you didn't really see that. So I almost wonder if you turn the page from him and maybe you look to at another veteran safety, maybe with some familiarity with Vic Fangio, like a couple of the Dolphins players who I mentioned, and go from there. That being said, if Kevin Byard's willing to come back on a relatively favorable deal, that changes things. But I think right now you want some familiarity there if you're Vic Fangio to kind of help implement the defense and get guys on the same page and show them how it's supposed to look like.
All right, more text messages coming in for Andrew. Andrew, can he move Slay to safety, or is he CB1 when he's here?
I think next season would probably be his final season as a CB1. I don't know that he would transition too well to safety. Look at the tackling isn't there, the physicality to be able to get downhill and make those tackles. I don't view that as a Walter Thurmond, if you will, situation where I thought he was a little bit more of a scrappy type of player, cornerback that made that transition. But I think this will probably be his final season as CB1. It's just a matter of how they choose to utilize him in terms of how effective he'll be in that scheme.
Yeah, we'll got more text messages coming in for you here, Andrew. So we'll
Sure,
read off some of the stuff from here. But before we get to before we get back to the text messages that are coming in for Andrew, and you can keep them coming 609-403-0973. The one thing with Vic Fangio, you say, hey, he's the guy who originated this defense. He's the best of these guys in terms of Gannon, Desai. Do you think though that the Fangio style of defense, that teams have figured it out? That it's kind of, an antiquated scheme in this league, or is it still something that you think can work? Like, would you have rather have seen, hey, you got Vic Fangio, he's the best at running it, but would you have rather seen them change the philosophy on defense?
Well, I think if recent data is any indication, the NFL has caught up to his scheme. Now, we've seen a lot of, like you said, a lot of disciples and a lot of knockoffs, if you will, try to run his scheme to varying degrees of success. Now, I will say, give him an opportunity to run it his way. This is the architect of that defense. See what it looks like with the players that he needs, not the players that he's sort of been afforded, and see if he's able to sort of work his scheme around his personnel, which I understand that he is apt to do. So I'm interested to see how he sort of is able to mold and be flexible with his scheme and adapt it to the personnel at his disposal.
All right, let's get a question for Andrew. This is from Glenn in Northfield. To steal some comments from the Niners, most teams focus on the outside of defense, so they built a team focusing their offense on plays down the middle. I believe we need to do this on the Birds defense. In other words, it sounds like a question, do they need to get better in the middle of the field, linebacker, safety? Is that something that, I don't know, Roseman brought up that whole thing about Nakobe Dean yesterday, and there's this preconceived notion that we don't go after linebackers. What was your takeaway from that answer?
Yeah, he sort of bristled at the notion. By the way, he alluded the first part of Bo Wolf's question when he asked him about if he was surprised, given the allocated resources of the defensive line, that they weren't as productive as they probably should have been. And he went right to linebacker, which was a curious play from Howie Roseman, and he was really defensive in that, and he threw out Nakobe Dean and how much faith they have in Nakobe Dean, and he thought that Zach Cunningham had a decent season. So, I mean, it doesn't give you that sense that they're going to depart from what they believe in, their philosophical approach to the position. Now, you might see a free agent addition like maybe a Josie Jewell and probably a draft pick there to supplement the position, but I really do think that they're going to roll with, by and large, what we've seen. Now, you're going to see a slight upgrade from the Zach Cunningham, Nicholas Morrow, but I also think that Vic Fangio is going to say, hey, look, you got to give me something else to work with if you want me to run my scheme to the level that I know that we should be able to do it. So, I mean, they're going to have to change their philosophical approach, at least alter it a little bit to maximize what they're able to do defensively.
This one says, the Fangio hiring for me doesn't change much. Howie always need to be aggressive this offseason. And what he said yesterday about Dean and the cornerback contracts, I don't see how much this is changing. Do you think the Fangio hiring it's status quo, or does that change your outlook on the Eagles' mindset?
It changes my outlook on the mindset a little bit because you're affording someone with full autonomy and allowing him to have full control of the defense and have a heavy hand in crafting it in your vision. And the same thing goes for offense versus what we've grown accustomed to seeing over the past few years, where there's a lot of meddling. Nick Sirianni was, sort of spread thin, if you will, going between defense, offense, and he wasn't really able to dedicate any of his attention where it needed to be, and that's overseeing the whole thing as the CEO. So I think that's interesting, but it almost feels like you're taking a step back by hiring Vic Fangio and reverting back to the scheme that really, it looks like that. You talk about the offense being stale. The defensive scheme over the past few seasons has started to look like it's getting a little stale, and the league has caught up to it, as they do with most trends. and you have to completely revamp your personnel. That doesn't right now as it stands. I mean, they can't line up. They can't run that scheme right now. So they have a lot of work to do. So it doesn't seem. It seems like they got the guy that they wanted all along last year, but they have a lot of work to do in order to bring it up to speed. And when you have a head coach, I should say, like Nick Sirianni, who by all accounts is on the clock, that's a lot of work to do in only a few short months.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, InsideTheBirds.com. Let's go to the offensive side of the ball. Kellen Moore's name, Cliff Kingsbury, Jared Johnson, Frank Reich, Jim Bob Cooter. Some of those names have been mentioned. Not sure how realistic some are, some aren't. Any of those names pop off to you? Is there somebody else that you like?
Well, Kellen Moore, because he has experience calling plays. Gerard Johnson's someone who's intrigued me, but I don't know that you want to give full autonomy to a young coach who has no experience calling plays, because if you're Nick Sirianni, your fate more or less lies in the hands of your coordinators that you choose, and he would have to sort of guide them, much like he had to with Brian Johnson, and have some input there. So I don't know that would be the choice. But Kellen Moore, to me, is someone who I think, when you look at his work with Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert didn't have the season that many envisioned going in, but I think that you need somebody. His primary focus would be get Jalen Hurts back to MVP form, and I think that you would be able to see a noticeable difference there. Their hire, to me, Mike, is all going to come down to who has the best plan in getting our quarterback, our $250 million quarterback, to the standard that he was at in 2022. And I think of the candidates that you mentioned, Kellen Moore, to me, would be the most adept at doing that. And he runs a modified West Coast scheme, which I think would best suit what the Eagles can do offensively right now.
Yeah, let me get your thoughts then. If a coordinator came in here, is there an area on this offense where they would say we need an upgrade at that position on the offensive side of the ball?
Mm-hmm. Well, you talked about the middle of the field defensively, which whoever texted it in, they made a great point. But I would also argue that offensively, the Eagles have to have a much more sound tactic in attacking the middle of the field. Yeah, you have Dallas Goedert, but you need more than that. And they really struggled identifying a third receiver that could really alter the middle of the field and have teams respect that. Quez Watkins is a free agent. Olamide Zaccheaus is a free agent. And I think when you look at the Eagles as they're currently constituted, you have to say, okay, we got to upgrade our third receiver spot here, and someone who's really good at creating space. Now, to me, right now on the roster, I think Britton Covey is somebody who offers an interesting dimension, and I think he deserves more opportunities offensively, creating space for guys like AJ and Devontae to work. You saw him flash a little bit when he had his opportunities, but you also need to, in my opinion, look at someone in free agency like a Jawan Johnson from the San Francisco 49ers, who I think would be really good in that role, and also look to the draft, I think, to pair a young receiver with what you already have. But they certainly need to upgrade there.
Yeah, I guess what's your opinion on what to do it with Swift at running back? I mean, do you bring – I don't know. They're probably not going to spend money on him. Scott's a free agent. I think Gainwell has one more year. What's that running back position look like for you?
Man, that's a whole mess there. The only one under contract, as you said, was Kenny Gainwell. And I know you're not of the belief that DeAndre Swift really maximized his opportunities, and there's moments where he disappeared, and there's others that feel the same way. But to me, I view him as a head and shoulders more dynamic player than a Miles Sanders, but I also think that he needs a power element to complement him. So they envision that being Rashad Penny. That's obviously didn't happen, but I think they need to go through the draft and try and find somebody in the third round or so between the tackle with Bruiser, and he can sort of complement with that and give them more of a balanced rushing attack with having Kenny Gainwell mixed in as a change-up runner and someone that can catch passes out of the backfield. That's where I think that that's how I think they should address that.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, as he said, not a dearth of things to not talk about here. The Eagles have a ton of stuff coming up. Now they have a defensive coordinator. We should get the offensive coordinator here soon, and we'll see what's next. The free agent period just over a month away, and then draft season. Of course, the Eagles have 3 picks in the top 55 of the. You like this year's draft?
Yeah, for certain positions, others not so much. Running back is one of the positions that I'm not too high on coming in, but there are a couple of linebackers that I like that are around pick 50 when they pick 55 around there that they should be able to get, which I don't. That still might be a little bit rich for the Eagles, but they're going to have to change something from a philosophical standpoint.
Gotcha. Yeah, of course we'll be talking more about the draft with Andrew as that gets a little closer. Looking forward to that season as well as the Offseason Championship weekend. You can hear the games right here on 97.3 ESPN, and of course Andrew DiCecco on Football at 4. All right, brother. We'll talk to you next week, pal.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks.
There's Andrew, of course, and the Inside the Birds podcast each and every day, 4 o'clock, Football at 4 on the Sports Bash